Recursive processing in Reaper, Alvin Lucier. This is a work in progress showcase of a Reaper script I'm working on, which right now is called ReaCursive, which allows me to quickly generate an arbitrary number of recursive online renders of a given source material and its processing, inspired by Alvin Lucier's wonderful process piece from 1981 called
I am sitting in a room.
If you don't know the work, I suggest you simply find it and listen to it, as the whole technical and conceptual framework is baked into the text that Lucier recites. Lucier records himself reciting a text in a particular reverberant space. This recording is then played back into the space while re-recording it. This process is repeated over and over again with each iteration, and the room, by nature of its resonant characteristics and the way the voice excites it, filters the sound, which eventually leads to a resonant drone which retains some of the rhythm of the original recording at early iterations, but is eventually and gradually smoothened out. While I've mirrored this approach in a number of ways years ago, including an automated live sampling pure data version from 2017, I've always wanted to try this out in the realm of Reaper. Recursively processing and rendering source material with the same effects chain in an arbitrary number of times. To hear if this could be a worthwhile approach for interesting textures, exaggerated sparing, blurring, and surprising results in general. I will pick some source material to process, and I'll use my speaking voice where I simply recite the following. I am sitting in a Reaper session, different from the one you are in now. I have a basic effects chain, which mostly involves some EQ and basic resonance taming to make sure whatever accentuated resonances that might occur don't distort or reinforce themselves into infinity. In between this, I add the main effects plugin that is to recursively process the source. And for the sake of the initial demonstration, I've chosen a reverb. The reverb will add a bit of a tail over and over again, so I add a tail of 3 seconds to make sure whatever the result might be is allowed to ring out a little bit. Now let's try 10 recursions as a start. And I run the process and I wait until Reaper has done 10 render passes. And here's the 10th recursive iteration. Every iteration is added as an individual take underneath the original item. My experience tells me that, given the effects plugins used, it might very well run amok. So having access to every iteration is handy to perhaps pick an early iteration that retains more of the original source. Let's try a different flavor of reverb and run it with 20 recursions. A very different result. This process really forces you to explore, wait, and listen differently given the offline render approach, so I'll be tweaking a lot, rendering, going back, and so on. And here's another reverb flavor. But of course we don't need to stop at reverbs. We can put in any processing plugin in its stead and explore to our heart's content. Let's try with a pitch shifter. How about a delay? How about a frequency shifter? And at this point you might be thinking, how is this different from stacking an arbitrary number of effects processing plugins? It's not a whole lot different, but you'd have to stack all the processing plugins back to back, which, given your machine specs, might get very taxing if you want to stack this 10, 50, or 100 times. But again, making the script is about experimenting with the idea, the process, and it's not necessarily about finding a solution to a problem, because it is not necessarily a terribly useful workflow, but it is very, very interesting, which is more than enough most of the time. Thank you for listening.